It was late in the evening and the streetlights had just started to flicker on. The air was cold and the wind carried that sharp bite that only winter nights bring. A young girl pushed an old baby stroller down the quiet sidewalk. Her hands were red from the cold, and her thin jacket did little to keep her warm. Inside the stroller, wrapped in a faded blanket, was a tiny baby boy sleeping peacefully, unaware of the world around him. The girl's name was Lily. She was only 16, but her eyes looked older, like she had seen too much of life already. Every step she took was slow and careful. The stroller's wheels squeaked on the cracked pavement, and sometimes she had to stop to fix the broken handle with a bit of string she had tied together days before. She had been walking for hours, looking for a safe place to stay for the night. There were shelters around, but most were full or not safe for a girl with a baby. She had learned that the hard way. Some nights she slept in the train station, other nights behind the library where the lights stayed on all night. She didn't ask for much, just a corner where the wind didn't reach and a place where her baby brother Noah could sleep without being scared. A few months ago, things had been different. Lily used to live in a small apartment with her mother and baby brother. Her mother worked 2 jobs and tried her best, but life had its way of being unfair. When her mother passed away suddenly, everything fell apart. There were no relatives willing to help, and Lily was too young to take over the rent. Within a few weeks, they had nowhere to go, so she packed what little she had, a few clothes, some diapers, and a small bag of baby food, and started walking. Since then, the city had become her home, though it never felt like one. She knew which corners stayed warm from the bakery's ovens, which parks had cameras where it was safer to rest, and which street musicians didn't mind if she stood near them to listen. She always loved music. It reminded her of happier times when her mother used to play the piano at home, singing softly as she cooked dinner. Even now, whenever she heard a piano, her heart would ache, not from sadness, but from a strange kind of comfort. That night, as Lily passed the subway entrance, she heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the stairs. It was warm underground, and she thought maybe she could rest there for a while. Carefully, she pushed the stroller down, making sure not to wake Noah. When she reached the bottom, she found a quiet corner near an old vending machine that no longer worked. The tiled floor was cold, but at least it was dry. She sat down, pulled her thin blanket over herself, and watched as people hurried past. Strangers in big coats, carrying bags, rushing somewhere important. No one looked at her. She was invisible to them, but she didn't mind. She had learned that being unseen was sometimes safer than being noticed. She took out a small bottle of milk she had warmed earlier at a cafe that allowed her to use the microwave. When Noah stirred, she fed him gently, humming under her breath. Her voice was soft and a little shaky, but it soothed him. When he fell asleep again, she just stared at him for a long time, her heart heavy but full of love. He was the only family she had left. As she sat there, she thought about school. She used to love her music class. Her teacher once told her she had a gift, that she could play the piano with feeling, not just with skill. Sometimes she wondered if she'd ever play again. It seemed like another lifetime, one that didn't belong to her anymore. The night grew colder and the crowd began to thin. The trains came less often. Somewhere in the distance, a man played a guitar, his voice echoing through the tunnels. Lily closed her eyes, listening. The music made her smile for the first time in days. It reminded her that beauty could still exist even in dark places. But then she heard something else, a faint melody, soft and broken. It was coming from the other end of the platform. Curious, she stood up, keeping one hand on the stroller, and followed the sound. There, tucked in a small corner near a column, was an old upright piano. It was scratched and covered with stickers, the kind of public piano that people sometimes play during the day. But now it stood alone, the sound coming from a few keys someone had pressed accidentally when walking by. Lily stared at it for a long time. Her fingers tingled. It had been months since she had touched a piano. She looked around. No one was paying attention. Noah was still asleep. Slowly, she sat down on the wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly. The keys were cold under her fingers. Some were broken, others out of tune, but to her it was perfect. At first, she just pressed a few keys, testing the sound. Then, without thinking, she began to play. The melody came from deep inside her, soft, slow, filled with everything she couldn't say in words. Each note carried her pain, her love for her brother, her memories of her mother. The station filled with music. It wasn't loud, but it was beautiful, and it made the air feel lighter. People walking by stopped to listen. A man carrying coffee paused near the stairs. A woman with a suitcase set it down and wiped her eyes. A young boy pointed at the piano and smiled. For a few minutes, everyone forgot where they were. The noise of the city faded away, replaced by the sound of a girl pouring her heart into every note. Lily didn't notice any of them. Her eyes were closed. In her mind, she was home again, sitting beside her mother at their old piano, laughing as they played together. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "Never stop playing, Lily. Music can keep your heart alive." When she finished, the last note hung in the air for a long time before fading. Then slowly she opened her eyes. There were tears on her cheeks she hadn't noticed. A few people clapped softly, smiling at her. One woman came forward and dropped a few coins on the piano. Lily didn't know what to say. She just smiled back shyly and whispered, "Thank you." Then she looked at Noah, still sleeping peacefully, and felt a warmth inside her that no blanket could give. As the crowd left, she stayed there for a while longer. She played a few more songs, simple ones she remembered from childhood. The music seemed to calm her, like the world made sense again for a little while. When she finally stopped, she noticed something surprising. There was a small pile of coins on top of the piano, enough maybe to buy food for tomorrow. That night, she slept nearby, feeling a little less afraid. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. She didn't have a home, but she had something else, a piece of herself she thought she had lost. Music had found her again, and with it, a spark of hope. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the subway entrance. Lily woke to the sound of footsteps and voices. People were heading to work, some glancing curiously at her, others pretending not to see. She gathered her things and fed Noah again. Before leaving, she looked once more at the piano. It stood quietly in the corner, waiting. She promised herself she would come back. Every day after that, she returned to the subway. She played for a few hours whenever she could, and people began to notice. Some gave her coins, others just listened. She didn't play for money, she played for peace, for her mother, and most of all for her little brother. Each song she played seemed to tell their story without needing words. Lily didn't know it yet, but one of those days a stranger would record her playing, a stranger whose video would change everything. But for now, she just played. In that cold underground corner, a homeless 16-year-old girl and her baby brother had found something precious, a reason to keep going, and a way to make the world stop and listen. The next few days passed quietly. Every morning, the girl woke up early, checked on her baby brother, and made her way to the same subway station. She had started to think of that corner near the piano as her little world, a place where the rest of the city stopped moving so fast. It wasn't home, but it was something close. The piano was old, scratched, and slightly out of tune, but to her, it was beautiful. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, and there were stickers on the sides, hearts, stars, and little quotes left by strangers. Every time she sat on the bench, she could feel the history of the people who had played before her. Some must have been happy, others sad. Now it was her turn to add her story to that old piano. Each time she played, she lost herself in the music. Her fingers were quick and graceful, though sometimes stiff from the cold. People came and went, some rushing past, others stopping for a while. A few would drop coins into the stroller, thinking she was playing for money. She wasn't. The music was her way of surviving, of staying alive inside. It made her forget that she didn't have a warm bed or a kitchen or even a place to call home. One afternoon, as the station filled with the sound of footsteps and chatter, she began to play a song her mother used to sing. It was soft and sad, but hopeful at the same time. Her brother slept beside her, wrapped tightly in his blanket. The melody floated through the air, gentle and full of feeling. A little girl stopped to listen. She tugged at her father's hand and whispered something. The man smiled and stood beside her, watching quietly. When the song ended, the man walked over and said, "That was beautiful." His voice was warm and his eyes kind. He handed her a small paper bag. "It's just a sandwich," he said, "and some milk for the baby." The girl was surprised. She took it carefully, not wanting to seem greedy. "Thank you," she said softly. The man smiled again and walked away, his daughter waving goodbye. That small moment stayed with her all day. She ate slowly, saving half the sandwich for later, and fed the baby. For the first time in a while, she felt noticed, not pitied, but seen. As days went by, she kept coming back. Some people began to recognize her. There was a woman who always brought coffee, a boy who clapped every time she finished, and even a guard who made sure no one bothered her. The subway piano became her little stage, and her music became part of the station's daily rhythm. One evening while she was playing, a man in a dark coat stopped and pulled out his phone. He stood quietly filming her performance. She didn't notice she was lost in her song, eyes closed, heart open. The man didn't say anything. When she finished, he simply nodded with respect and left. That video would soon travel far beyond that subway station. The next morning, she was sitting in her usual spot when someone she had never seen before came up to her. It was a woman with bright eyes and a camera hanging from her neck. She smiled and said, "Are you the girl from the video?" The girl looked confused. "What video?" she asked. The woman pulled out her phone and showed her. There it was, a clip of her playing the piano, her little brother sleeping beside her stroller, people walking by and stopping to listen. The caption read, "Homeless teen plays piano for her baby brother. Heartbreaking and beautiful." The video had thousands of views already. The comments were filled with words like amazing, talented, and she deserves a chance. The girl didn't know what to say. She had never been on the internet before, not like this. She wasn't used to attention and she wasn't sure if she liked it. But things began to change quickly. Reporters started showing up at the station asking her questions. Some people tried to give her money. Others just wanted to shake her hand. She stayed polite but quiet, always careful to protect her baby brother. She didn't trust easily anymore, not after everything that had happened. Then one evening, as she packed up to leave, a tall man in a long coat approached her. He wasn't like the others. He introduced himself kindly and said he worked for a television show, a talent competition that looked for real stories and real talent. He said he had seen her video and wanted her to come in for an audition. She froze. "An audition?" she repeated softly. He nodded. "Yes, you have something special. People feel your music. You should come and play for our judges." The girl didn't know how to answer. She looked down at her brother, who was awake now, staring up with big, curious eyes. Her heart ached. She wanted to say yes, but she was scared. What if they didn't like her? What if she wasn't good enough? "I don't have nice clothes," she said quietly. "And I can't leave him alone." The man smiled gently. "We can help with that," he said. "There are shelters that can watch over him safely during the audition, and we'll make sure you have everything you need." He gave her a card with a phone number written on it. "Think about it," he said before walking away. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat awake for hours, holding her brother close. The city outside was loud. Sirens, car horns, the hum of traffic, but her thoughts were louder. She kept imagining herself standing on a stage in front of people playing again. The idea scared her, but it also filled her with a strange kind of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, she went to a small shelter run by kind volunteers. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, offered to help. The woman gave her clean clothes, helped her wash up, and even found a safe room where the baby could stay for a few hours. "You just focus on your music," the woman said kindly. When Lily looked in the mirror after getting cleaned up, she almost didn't recognize herself. Her hair was brushed, her face looked brighter, and her eyes had a little sparkle again. She smiled shyly, holding her baby in her arms. "We can do this," she whispered to him. "We'll do it for you." The day of the audition arrived. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she stepped inside the large building. The lights were bright and everything felt too big. She had never seen so many people in one place who looked so confident, but she remembered why she was there, not for fame, not for money, but for her brother. While waiting for her turn, she looked around and listened to others practicing. Some sang loudly, others danced or played instruments. She stayed quiet, sitting in a corner, whispering softly to herself to stay calm. When her name was finally called, her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The judges sat behind a long table, smiling politely. The audience was quiet, waiting. One of the judges asked her name and what she would be performing. She told them simply, "A song I used to play for my baby brother." There was something in her voice, humble, honest, full of truth. Then she sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first the sound was soft, almost fragile. But as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music filled the room, wrapping around everyone like a warm blanket. It told a story without words, a story of love, loss, and hope. Every note came straight from her heart. By the time she finished, the room was completely silent. Then slowly, people began to clap. Some stood up. One of the judges wiped a tear from her eye. The girl sat there, stunned, her hands still on the keys. In that moment, everything she had gone through, the cold nights, the hunger, the fear, faded away. All that was left was the sound of applause and the warmth of knowing that for once the world had really listened. She walked off stage holding back tears, her heart full. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: she had done it. She had played for her brother, and she had played for herself. Outside, as she held Noah in her arms again, she whispered, "We're going to be okay." The sound of the applause still echoed in her ears long after she left the stage. Her hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from disbelief. She had really done it. The bright lights, the faces in the crowd, the warm smiles from the judges. All of it felt like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. Backstage, one of the show's assistants handed her a small bottle of water and smiled. "You did amazing," she said. "That was one of the most emotional performances we've ever seen." The girl smiled shyly and whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't used to compliments. For a long time, no one had really noticed her. Now it felt like the whole world had stopped to listen. A few minutes later, the man who had invited her to audition appeared with a proud look on his face. "You moved everyone in that room," he said softly. "You should be proud of yourself." She nodded, clutching her baby brother close. He was awake now, his tiny hands reaching out toward her hair. She kissed his forehead gently. Everything she had done, every note she had played, was for him. When they left the building that day, the sky outside was bright and clear. The cold air brushed against her cheeks, but for once she didn't feel it. Her heart was warm. As she walked back toward the shelter, she noticed people smiling at her, whispering as they passed. She didn't know yet that the video of her performance had already been uploaded online, spreading like wildfire. By the next morning, her name was everywhere. Clips of her crying at the piano, the way she looked down at her baby brother before playing, and the emotion in her music. It all captured people's hearts. News outlets shared her story. Homeless teen brings judges to tears with piano performance for her baby brother. The comments online were filled with love and encouragement. People from around the world offered help. Some wanted to donate, others wanted to find her and give her a home. Many said her performance had reminded them of hope, of love, of what really matters. At the shelter, one of the volunteers came running toward her, holding a phone. "You're all over the internet," she said, almost out of breath. "Everyone's talking about you." The girl blinked in surprise. "Me?" "Yes, you. People are calling you an inspiration. They're saying your story gave them strength." The girl didn't know how to respond. She wasn't trying to inspire anyone. She had just wanted to play. She had wanted her little brother to have a moment of peace, a moment of beauty. But somehow that small act had touched millions. Over the next few days, her life began to change in small but important ways. A local charity reached out and offered her and her brother a temporary apartment. It was small but clean and warm, with a real bed and a kitchen. When she walked in for the first time, she stood still for a long moment, taking in the sight of the soft light through the window, the smell of soap, the quiet hum of safety. She placed her brother on the bed and laughed softly. "Can you believe this?" she whispered to him. "We have a roof." That night, she didn't have to worry about the cold. She wrapped herself in a blanket and held her brother close, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. Meanwhile, messages kept pouring in from around the world. Some came from musicians who wanted to help her continue her education. Others were from people who had once been homeless themselves, telling her how proud they were of her courage. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she belonged somewhere. A few days later, she was invited back to the show for an interview. They wanted to know more about her life, her love for music, and what had inspired her song. She was nervous, but she agreed. She felt that maybe sharing her story could help someone else who was struggling too. When the cameras turned on, she sat on a simple chair with her baby brother in her arms. The interviewer smiled warmly and said, "You've moved millions of people around the world with your music. Tell us, what does that song mean to you?" She looked down at her brother, then back up. It's about love, she said softly. It's about holding on when everything falls apart. I played it because I wanted him to feel safe, even if we had nothing else. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were strong. The interviewer smiled, visibly touched. The room fell quiet again, just like during her performance. After the interview aired, even more people reached out. A famous music school sent her an offer for free lessons. A local family offered to babysit her brother whenever she needed time to study or practice. Strangers sent baby clothes, blankets, and toys. It was as if the world had wrapped its arms around her and said, "You're not alone anymore." One afternoon, she was sitting by the window of her small apartment, watching the rain fall. The baby slept peacefully in his crib. On the table beside her was a small keyboard that someone had donated. She touched the keys lightly and smiled. The sound wasn't perfect, it was electronic, not like the real piano at the station, but it was enough. She began to play softly, just for herself. The music filled the room, warm and gentle, mixing with the sound of rain on the window. She thought about everything that had happened, the long nights on the streets, the cold, the fear, the endless walking. It all felt like a distant memory now. The world that had once felt so cruel suddenly felt full of kindness. But even in this new beginning, she didn't forget where she came from. Sometimes, she still went back to the subway station just to play on that old piano again. She didn't do it for attention anymore. She did it because that place had saved her. It had given her music back, and through music it had given her hope. People still recognized her there. Some asked for pictures. Others just thanked her for inspiring them. She always smiled politely, but what she loved most was when someone sat beside her to listen quietly. It reminded her of those early days when the world was silent and only the piano spoke. Then, one morning, a letter arrived at the apartment. It was from the television show. They were inviting her to come back for the semifinals. She stared at the letter for a long time, her heart racing. It wasn't just another performance. This time it was a chance to show how far she'd come. She trained harder than ever. Every day after feeding her brother and cleaning up, she practiced for hours. The melody she worked on was something new, something she had written herself. It was full of the emotions she had lived through: fear, pain, love, and hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. When the day of the semifinals arrived, she stood backstage again, holding the same quiet determination she had the first time. The lights were bright, the crowd bigger than before, but she wasn't scared. Not this time. She thought about the people who had helped her, the strangers who had cheered her on, the shelter workers who had believed in her when no one else did. Most of all, she thought about her baby brother who had given her a reason to keep going. When her name was called, she took a deep breath, smiled, and walked onto the stage. The judges greeted her warmly, and one of them said, "You've already touched so many hearts. Whatever happens tonight, you've made a difference." She nodded, her heart full. Then she sat down at the piano. Her fingers rested on the keys for a moment before she began to play. The song started softly, almost like a whisper. It told a story, not through words, but through every note. The melody rose and fell, carrying the audience through her memories. The dark nights, the streetlights, the sound of her brother's breathing as he slept beside her. Then it grew stronger, brighter, full of courage and light. By the time she reached the final note, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. The judges looked moved, one of them holding a hand over her heart. The girl smiled through her tears. She didn't need to win. In her heart, she already had. The night after the semi-finals, she could barely sleep. Her mind kept replaying every note she had played, every sound of the audience clapping, every tear she saw in the judge's eyes. It all felt like a dream, too good to be true. The girl who used to sleep under bridges and train stations was now standing on a stage in front of millions. But even as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about her baby brother. He was the reason she had kept going. She reached over and touched his tiny hand. He was sleeping peacefully, his face calm and innocent. She smiled softly. "We're getting closer," she whispered. One step at a time. The next morning, her phone kept buzzing. Messages from strangers filled her inbox, people thanking her for her music, for her strength, for giving them hope. Some shared their own stories, saying how they had struggled too and how her song had made them believe again. One message stood out. It was from a woman who owned a small music academy. She said she had seen the girl's performance and wanted to offer her free lessons, along with childcare during her classes. "You have a gift," the woman wrote. "You deserve a chance to grow." Tears filled her eyes as she read the message. For so long, she had believed that dreams were for other people, not for someone like her. Now the world was telling her something different, that maybe, just maybe, she belonged among them. She accepted the offer. Every afternoon, she would take her brother with her to the academy. The teachers there were kind and gentle. They helped her read sheet music again, taught her new techniques, and gave her a small practice room with a real piano. The first time she sat at that piano, she cried quietly. The keys were clean, the sound rich and full. It felt like the universe was giving her a second chance. She practiced for hours every day, losing herself in the music. Sometimes she brought her brother into the room and played soft lullabies for him. He would listen with big eyes, smiling and waving his little hands in the air. Those were her happiest moments, just the two of them, surrounded by music and love. As the final competition approached, she knew she had to do something special. She didn't want to just perform another song. She wanted to tell her whole story through the music. She began writing a new piece, one that started slow and sad, like the nights she spent on the streets, then grew strong and hopeful, like the days that followed. Every chord she played was a memory, every melody a feeling she could never say out loud. Days turned into weeks, and the city started to feel like a different place. When she walked down the street, people smiled at her. Some recognized her and wished her luck. The woman at the corner bakery always gave her an extra piece of bread. Even the man who used to sweep the subway floor where she once played would nod and say, "You're going to make it." The night before the finals, she couldn't stop thinking about how far she had come. She remembered the first time she found that old piano underground, the sound of her frozen fingers touching the keys, the way strangers had stopped to listen, the feeling of hope that had been born in that moment. Now she was about to stand on the biggest stage of her life. The morning of the finals was bright and cold. She dressed carefully, wearing a simple blue dress that the show had given her. Her brother was wearing a tiny white shirt and soft pants. She kissed his forehead before handing him to the woman from the academy, who had offered to watch him during the show. "I'll be right back," she whispered. "You'll see me on the screen, okay?" As she arrived at the studio, the crowd outside was enormous. People held signs with her name on them. Some had printed pictures of her and her brother. She couldn't believe it. For so long she had walked through those same streets unnoticed. Now people were cheering for her. Inside, the air buzzed with excitement. Other contestants were getting ready, checking their microphones, tuning their instruments. But she stayed quiet, sitting in a corner with her hands on her lap. Her heart was steady. She wasn't afraid anymore. She knew exactly why she was there. When her turn finally came, she stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than she remembered. The audience was completely silent, waiting. One of the judges smiled and said, "Welcome back. We've been looking forward to hearing you again." She smiled nervously but said nothing. She didn't need to. Her music would do the talking. The stage crew adjusted the piano bench for her and she sat down. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the world fade away. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, like the sound of raindrops falling on the pavement. The melody was delicate and fragile, telling the story of a lonely girl walking through the city with a stroller, searching for shelter. As the song grew, so did the emotion. The pain, the hunger, the fear, all of it came out through her fingers. But there was something else in the music too. Love. A deep, powerful love that kept her moving no matter how hard life became. The judges leaned forward, completely silent. The audience barely breathed. Each note seemed to reach straight into their hearts. Then the melody changed. It became brighter, stronger. It spoke of the people who had helped her, the strangers who had offered food, the kind shelter worker who gave her a place to sleep, the music teacher who opened her academy doors. It told of kindness, of second chances, of hope. By the time she reached the final part, her hands moved with grace and confidence. The music swelled like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. The last note hung in the air, pure and beautiful, before fading into silence. For a few seconds, the entire room stayed still. Then the audience erupted into applause. Loud, thunderous applause that echoed through the hall. People stood up, cheering and clapping. Some were crying. The judges, too, were visibly moved. One of them stood up and said softly into the microphone, "That was pure magic." She sat there, her hands still trembling over the keys. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. She had poured her soul into that song, and the world had listened. After the show, reporters asked her how she felt. She didn't have fancy words, she just said, "I'm thankful. I played for my brother, and for everyone who ever felt forgotten." That night, when she returned to the apartment, she found her brother already asleep. She sat beside him, brushed a small curl of hair from his forehead, and whispered, "We did it." The next morning, she woke up to even more messages and calls. People wanted interviews, schools wanted to offer scholarships, and music companies wanted to meet her. But she didn't rush. She wanted to stay grounded, to keep life simple. She still went back to the subway sometimes, not to play for fame, but to remember where it all began. One afternoon, she returned there with her brother in his stroller. The same old piano was still there, scratched and slightly out of tune. She smiled, sat down, and played a soft tune while her brother clapped his tiny hands. People gathered around, recognizing her from the show, but she didn't care about attention. She was just a girl playing piano again, like the first time. The music filled the station, mixing with the hum of trains and the footsteps of strangers. For a moment, it felt like the world stood still again, just as it had when her story began. As she played the final note, a small crowd applauded. She looked around and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening." And as she stood up, her brother reached for her hand. The world outside was big and uncertain, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had her music, her heart, and her little brother, and that was enough. The weeks after the finals felt like a whirlwind. Every morning brought new messages, new letters, and new chances. The girl who had once sat under streetlights pushing a stroller through the cold was now being called an inspiration all over the world. Newspapers wrote about her courage, TV hosts praised her strength, and musicians wanted to collaborate with her. It was overwhelming, but she handled it quietly, with that same calm strength she had always carried. Even though she didn't win first place in the competition, the audience saw her as the real winner. Her story touched hearts far beyond the show. Videos of her performance were still being shared online, each one gathering more comments from people saying her music had made them cry, smile, and believe in kindness again. But fame was never what she wanted. She only wanted to give her baby brother a better life, a chance to grow up in warmth, not fear. So instead of chasing the spotlight, she focused on building a new life, one that felt real. The television show helped her get a scholarship to a well-known music school. When she walked into the campus for the first time, she couldn't believe she belonged there. The classrooms were filled with polished instruments, shining floors, and the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all those hard nights lift just a little. Every day she studied hard. She learned music theory, piano technique, and even how to compose her own songs. The teachers loved her dedication. They said her music carried something that couldn't be taught, a kind of honesty that came from living through pain and still choosing hope. In the afternoons, she worked part-time at the same music academy that had helped her before. She taught little children how to play simple songs. Watching their small hands touch the keys made her smile. It reminded her of the time she first learned to play, how music had always been her way of speaking when words failed. Her baby brother grew fast. He was walking now, laughing easily, full of life. Every time he heard music, he clapped and tried to sing along, even if he didn't know the words. Their small apartment was always filled with sound, soft melodies, baby laughter, and the quiet hum of peace. One day, as she was practicing, she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, she saw the producer from the talent show standing there, smiling warmly. "We're doing a reunion concert," he said. "We want you to perform again. It's not a competition, just a celebration of how far everyone's come." Her heart skipped. "Me? You really want me there?" "Of course," he said. People still talk about your performance. You reminded them what music really means." She agreed, though part of her was nervous. It had been months since she last stood on a big stage. But she knew she had to go, not for herself, but for the people who had believed in her. On the day of the concert, she brought her brother with her. He was sitting in the front row, smiling proudly, holding a small toy piano someone had given him. She walked onto the stage wearing a simple white dress. The lights were warm and gentle this time, not as blinding as before. The audience clapped softly as she sat down at the piano. Before she started, she spoke into the microphone. Her voice was calm and clear. "When I first played in front of you, I was scared," she said. "I didn't know if I belonged anywhere, but music gave me a home when I had none. It gave me strength when I felt weak. And now, I just want to share that feeling with you all." Then she began to play. The song she had written for that night was different from anything she'd played before. It was brighter, filled with life. The melody rose like the morning sun, soft at first and then full of color. It told the story of finding hope after darkness, of learning to trust again, of holding on to love no matter what. As she played, the camera zoomed in on her face. There were no tears this time, just a quiet smile. The audience swayed gently with the rhythm, some holding their hands to their hearts. The music filled every corner of the hall, reaching people in ways that words never could. When the final note faded, the room exploded in applause. The audience stood, cheering louder than ever before. Her little brother clapped too, giggling with joy. One of the judges from the original show came up to the stage, gave her a hug, and whispered, "You didn't just play tonight, you healed hearts." That evening, as she left the concert hall, she looked up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than she remembered. She walked slowly, pushing her brother's stroller, her fingers brushing over the handle the way they used to long ago. But now, instead of sadness, she felt peace. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bills to pay, classes to attend, and days when she felt tired. But now she had support, friends, and a community that cared. She volunteered at shelters, playing the piano for others who were struggling. She told them that music had saved her and that it could save them too. One afternoon, she returned to the same subway station where it had all begun. The old piano was still there, though it looked even more worn now. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. A few people recognized her instantly and started recording, but she smiled and said gently, "No cameras, please, just listen." Then she played. The notes echoed through the tunnels, just like before. But this time, they sounded lighter. It was as if the piano itself remembered her. Every song, every tear, every moment of courage. The small crowd that gathered stayed silent, listening closely. Some smiled, others wiped their eyes. When she finished, a young boy from the crowd came up and said softly, "I want to play like you someday." She looked at him kindly and said, "You can. Just never stop believing that you can." He smiled, and she handed him her seat at the piano. "Go ahead," she said. "Play something." The boy hesitated, then pressed a few keys, laughing nervously. She clapped for him, just as others once clapped for her. That moment made her realize something important, that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been lost and found a way to keep going. Years later, she would become a full-time music teacher. She would have her own small school, where children from all walks of life could come and learn for free. On the wall of her classroom, she hung a photo of that old subway piano. Under it, she wrote a short message. "Kindness is a song the world never forgets." Her brother grew up surrounded by love and music. Whenever people asked him about his sister, he smiled proudly and said, "She taught me that music can change everything." Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would sit together by the piano. She would play and he would hum along. The same melody that once echoed through cold subway tunnels now filled a warm little home with laughter and light. She often thought about her mother too, the woman who once played the piano in their old apartment. In her heart, she believed her mother was still listening, somewhere, smiling at the music her daughter had created out of pain, courage, and love. And so, her story came full circle. From the streets to the stage, from loneliness to connection, from silence to song, she had transformed her life through the power of music and the strength of her heart.